Very pleased now to be joined by the one, the only, the handsome, the debonair, the swashbuckling. You know him from Turf Show Times, SB Nation's home for Los Angeles Rams content. I can't even tell you how I know this person. I really cannot. I've waded through some strange waters, some incredible waters, with the one and only Kenneth Arthur. Kenny, how are you doing? Welcome to the Blog and the Boys side of the SB Nation universe.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm swashbuckling. It's been a long road, definitely over our SB Nation years to get to this point. And I'm just excited for another meeting of, let's say, NFC powerhouses.
That's true. I was thinking, and Kenny was so gracious with his time. I told him I would be like 5 minutes, and then it was like 3 hours. So Kenny already starting off very strong. But we've done some like just of all the people I've podcasted with that we work with, like I have not touched the sectors of randomness that I've touched with you. This is we've podcasted about the Cowboys and Seahawks before. We've talked about the league on FX. We have notably podcasted about Survivor with some great people. We're actually recording this on Wednesday, so we haven't seen the third episode of this season of Survivor. Before we dive in, who's your winner pick for Survivor this year?
I definitely have a soft spot for Cody. I don't know if anyone really cares, but what I like about Cody, he reminds me of myself. If I was to go on Survivor, I think that I would just be kind of more thinking about the bigger pictures of life as opposed to maybe the game sometimes. Those are the types of people that I think I sympathize with and kind of relate to. And I think he's kind of an interesting player to watch. I definitely like watching Jesse, LA native, so that's another one. And yes, I do live here in Los Angeles. So, that's there's some good characters and certainly the game has changed a lot. I hope anybody watching this likes Survivor as much as we do, but it's been an interesting road for Jeff and the crew over the last few seasons.
Very much so. Drop the 4, leave the 3. The Cowboys themselves have dropped the 4 sort of by force. They didn't mean to drop Dak Prescott, but Cooper Rush, now speaking of 3, has won his last 3 starts. Now heads on out to Los Angeles. This is kind of a sneaky, low-key rivalry for the Cowboys. Obviously, a team that bounced them in the playoffs after we chatted, actually. After the Cowboys beat the Seahawks in the wild card round 4 years ago, they were bounced by Jared Goff's Rams. And a lot has happened. You've done a great job chronicling all of it at turfshowtimes.com. Everybody go check that out. But this is maybe the – and I say this obviously under the understanding that Dak Prescott's not playing in this game, but this is maybe the least afraid I've ever been of Sean McVay's Rams. Is that a fair sentiment in your mind? Like, do you feel like this is the most weak version of the Goliath version of themselves?
I think that's a fair assessment of the way that the Rams have played this year, mostly because I think Matthew Stafford throughout his career has certainly had pockets of like really bad games, right? So, we could just say that in a vacuum, we're looking at just 4 games of him being bad when that's happened throughout his career. I still think that when measuring him up against Jared Goff, just because those were the most obvious changes under Sean McVay's offense, I mean, even watching last week's loss, brutal, ugly loss to the 49ers, there were still those moments where it's like, oh, Matthew Stafford's throwing a no-look pass. Oh, Matthew Stafford's hitting this guy that nobody else, very few quarterbacks could hit. There are those other plays, of course, that have been really bad, and we'll talk about those. But I think that there's at least that threat of danger at the quarterback position that for me isn't there with Jared Goff. The success that Jared Goff is having with the Lions right now, nothing but luck to him and moving forward. I love what former Rams executive Brad Holmes is doing as the general manager in Detroit. I still don't know that I'm going to see those wow special plays that we'll see from Matthew Stafford sometimes. And then you have Cooper Kupp being able to put himself on another pedestal only with Matthew Stafford. We never saw this Cooper Kupp threat prior to 2021. So, there are that aspects of it. But, to your point about feeling less threatened and this is the least dangerous team, there is nothing else besides Cooper Kupp. And there may not be anything else there really for Matthew Stafford. He's not going anywhere else other than tight end Tyler Higbee. There's no running game. The defense is kind of shoddy. So I do think that's a fair assessment, but at the same time, with the caveat being, okay, we also saw most of these guys win the Super Bowl last year, so maybe it's just a sleeping giant.
That's fair, and I do think, I don't know that there's a Rams fan who's thinking like, oh, we made a mistake, like, oh, we won the Super Bowl, but like, I would rather live with the like extreme highs and whatever the lows are here, than with whatever Jared Goff has got going on in Detroit, like, whatever, peace, health, wealth, and happiness to Goff, to your point. Shout out to him losing to your Seahawks, but I don't think anyone is thinking that the Rams made a mistake in that sense. You talked about Cooper Kupp, and I want to get to.
It's very hard for me to share with Turf Showtime Rams fans.
Look, I say your Seahawks because it's your division. The whole the whole division is yours, the whole NFC West. But when it comes to Cooper Kupp, and I've been thinking about this. Obviously, Trayvon Diggs is a really polarizing player, and I want to get to the pass rush side of this game, but I do think this is America's Game of the Week on Fox. We got Kevin Burkhardt, Greg Olsen, Aaron Andrews on the call. Second week in a row for the Cowboys. You obviously get a lot of big time games with the Rams. I think this could be, not that, and there's like a common football fan who doesn't know who Trayvon Diggs, but he's had a different season this year. Obviously he's had 2 interceptions now the last 2 games, but it's been more of a lockdown, kind of your classic, more appreciated top cornerback type of season. And I think especially after what Cooper Kupp did on Monday night, and I know a lot of that was like, call it garbage time, call it whatever you want, but I mean, he blew, what do you have, like 4,000 against the 49ers? And so if Trayvon Diggs shuts down Cooper Kupp, do you feel like that is, I don't know that it's a litmus test, but is that like, would that be a huge sort of declaration that like, okay, yeah, this dude is for real? Like, again, understanding that there's going to be some pass rush problems for Matthew Stafford as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's really smart of you, RJ, to point out,
okay.
But it is, because a lot of people don't really have any sort of foresight, or they don't ever look below the numbers. Cooper Kupp did get a lot of, I don't know if it's necessarily always garbage time. He had a lot of yards in the first half, but it's kind of like empty yards sometimes. Nothing against Cooper Kupp, because he's still maybe the best receiver in the NFL, which is why he can get those. But there is that part of it where if you go back to the week 1 of last season, Cooper Kupp has only had 3 games under 90 yards. The Rams haven't played well in all of those games in which he's had 100 yards. Some of those games he puts up 100 yards in the fourth quarter, and it's like they're not playing that well. So there's those moments too where it's like he's just getting yards when it doesn't really impact the game significantly. And by the way, all of those games, those are against the Cardinals.
All 3.
Yeah. So every other game,
including 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, he had 44 yards, which was his lowest since the start of week 1. The Cardinals are the only team to do it. And the Rams have won 2 of those 3 games in which they held him to like 70 yards or less. So they still won some of those games. But going to Trayvon Diggs, I do think like if that's the matchup, Trayvon Diggs versus Cooper Kupp, and it's like he finishes with 35 yards or even 75 yards, and it's kind of like another bad. I do think like that is a very indicative of Trayvon Diggs having a good game, because there is nothing else really going on for the Rams right now. Stafford is force feeding Tyler Higbee all of these targets. He's averaging 3.6 intended air yards per attempt. So it's like, here's a short thing here to Higbee over and over and over again. Here's a mid-range shot to Cooper Kupp over and over and over again. And there's nothing else going on in the entire offense. Not with Allen Robinson, not with Ben Skowronek, or Skowronek or whatever, however they pronounce it this week. But I do think like, I haven't followed Trayvon Diggs this year as closely. So that's definitely something to keep note of if he's more of a shutdown variety this season. And I think, put him on Cooper Kupp and see what else Stafford can come up with, because for whatever reason, he and Allen Robinson just don't have any chemistry, any relationship. And I think Rams fans are notably and reasonably questioning why that decision was made, and in conjunction with trading Robert Woods for a 6th round pick.
I always thought it was silly that the people would say things like free Allen Robinson from Chicago. He went there, like he chose there. He was a free agent, like like he picked them.
Yeah.
They didn't draft him. And so I think the Allen Robinson preseason hype is not exactly aging well 4 weeks in. I'm glad to hear you sort of validate that theory at least. I agree with you that I don't know what to call Kupp's production, because you're right. It's not garbage time. It's not trash. Empty calories is maybe the best way to do it, kind of piggybacking off what you do, because it does kind of feel like Rams start with the ball at their own 25 of the 50 or 60 yards it takes to ultimately settle for a field goal. It feels like he winds up with 45 of those very often, and that happens 2 to 3 times a game, and you just look at the very end, he's got 12 catches for $160 or whatever it is. So I'm very, very excited. This is maybe the biggest test for Trayvon outside of the playoff game a year ago throughout his young career so far. I'm certain or at least are closer to knowing than I do. Matthew Stafford was pressured on 47% of dropbacks against the 49ers on Monday night? Something ridiculous like that?
Yeah.
I mean, how is that possible? What is, this is supposed to be the Rams. And Andrew Whitworth retired, kind of, he denied it, but kind of flirted with the Cowboys a little bit in the lead up to the season kicking off. Would you say the state of the offensive line, because that's obviously the layer before Stafford, is bad, is fine, is passable, because they've got a pretty prominent pass rush coming to town on Sunday afternoon?
Yeah, well, one thing to add about Cooper Kupp too, it's those are going to be, it's like handing off the ball. It's like if you hand off the ball 15 times, no doubt that running back is going to get 15 carries.
It's like the reason DVOA was created, like what Cooper Kupp's doing, kind of.
Yeah, it's like if you want to throw the ball to Cooper Kupp 15 times, I almost guarantee he's going to catch 11 of them. These are high percentage throws. And then the offense is saying well, we expect him to get 8 or 9 yards on those, even if he's not going to go. So, yeah, there's that part of it. And that's one of the aspects that's missing is Van Jefferson, who's not an all-world starting wide receiver, but he did have 800 yards on a lot of deep attempts from Matthew Stafford. And having time to throw obviously is another part of that. And Stafford has gone from being 6th in intended air yards per pass attempt to being 30th in intended air yards per pass attempt. Only Kyler Murray is really low below him.
Your NFC West.
Yeah, the NFC West, the number 1 quarterback, Geno Smith. So it's like those deep passes, those intermediate passes just haven't been there at all. And maybe that is largely due to the changes in offensive line. Andrew Whitworth, as you say, retires. And, it's like he was so good that we barely even said how good he was when he was in the league. And now the Rams have signed Joseph Noteboom, who was the backup for 4 years, always thinking, this guy's got the talent and everything. And I don't know that he's necessarily been a visibly huge problem necessarily, but it's okay, one of these guys probably deserves to go into the Hall of Fame. Mm-hmm. And the other guy,
it's a guy.
He's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, is Tyler Smith your left tackle now? Is that
I would, you talked about upsetting some Turf Show Times readers. Some Blogging the Boys readers and viewers are pretty upset because Tyler Smith is the left tackle now. And that's a whole different process as to how we got here. But he's been exceptional through the first 4 games of the season. Kind of a happy surprise. Again, the Tyron Smith injury forced that hand. But not every team is so fortunate. To your point, hey, you have a Hall of Fame guy leave like Whitworth or like Tyron. It's not the easiest thing in the world to just kind of Indiana Jones idol swap them.
Yeah, but let's just say that I don't hear any talk like that about Joseph Noteboom in the way that I think you're saying Cowboys fans are talking about Tyler Smith. There's not exciting. I haven't heard any talk about Joseph Noteboom, including from myself. I should probably be talking about him. This is the most I've ever talked about Joseph Noteboom. And they gave him a pretty sizable contract. And so he's the left tackle. Left guard David Edwards has been a fairly dependable player, was out last week in the concussion protocol. And I think, interestingly, wasn't in the concussion protocol until after Tua Tagovailoa's injury. You
We
know,
saw that all last week, right?
yeah,
Everybody, except for Cameron Brate on Sunday Night Football, but even they kind of very quickly addressed that. The
totally.
Bucks team doctors, right?
So then Bobby Evans, who's been the focus, whoever your most hated offensive lineman is in Dallas, every time he comes in, what would that? I think I know who it is. Help me out here.
Well, honestly, right now, there's not really a guy. I mean, I would say, right now it's probably Connor McGovern when he's healthy. He's there. So there's been a domino effect, obviously, after the Tyron injury that feels like forever ago now, and kicking Tyler Smith out to left tackle. He was originally slated to play left guard himself. But now Jason Peters is kind of their de facto starting left guard. He hasn't played an entire game yet. We've seen his snaps increase so far. They're sort of waiting him in. Actually, right before you and I started this recording, he tweeted out this like funny video of him in Cooper Rush. I don't know if you saw that, but I mean, this could be his first start. Honestly, like that time will tell. We're recording it on Wednesday, but I mean, if that's the case, I don't know who they're left or right. It's the rookie everybody loves, Tyler Smith. Jason Peters, another Hall of Famer. Tyler Biadasz, who's been very serviceable at center, Zach Martin, another Hall of Famer, and Terrence Steele, who's really been impressive, whose first career start came against the Rams in the season opener in 2020.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, was Terrence Steele? He was struggling more so last year, right?
He's had some dips, some peaks and valleys. I'll say that for sure.
So that's like kind of like where Bobby Evans is minus the peaks, and so like I think that's he was starting at left guard. I think he might still start at left guard this weekend. Center was Brian Allen in week 1. He's missed the last 3 games. He won't be back for this game. His backup Coleman Shelton started the season as the right guard, had to move over to center. He's out this week. So forget about Coleman Shelton. That means that the Rams are down to Jeremiah Colon or Coloni. I don't know how to spell his name yet because he hasn't started before. Right guard, off the top of my head, wouldn't be anybody that's been playing very often. And then right tackle is the very dependable Rob Havenstein. So to get down to it, it's like, yeah, this is pretty favorable matchup for any defensive line, especially a good one on the interiors, because it's just going to be a very mishmashed situation up the middle. It's going to require, this is where I get into a very touchy situation for Matthew Stafford and quarterbacks. It's like with the 17-game season, with the fact that Stafford just played a 21-game season, with the fact that, there's questions about his arm and his elbow and health at all times. It's like, at what point do the Rams ever get into a situation where they go, let's just start John Wolford for 1 week and see what happens? Because it could be a touchy situation of just like, hey, we're trying to get the ball out as fast as possible as they're trying to go through this offensive line. It seems to be a nightmare, worst case scenario as of right now.
Yeah, I mean, you do kind of need like a 10-day IL right now for Matthew Stafford kind of thing. Are you a Mariners guy? Is that your?
Well, I would say that as far as baseball goes, I haven't had much reason to pay attention for 20 years.
But they're back. That's all. Well, they're going to lose, obviously, in the ALCS to my Houston Astros. But that's a whole different conversation. Anyway, I mean, like, I feel like every Cowboys fan, alone your Tyler Smith questioning aside, just loved everything that you had to say. And I think that's why Monday night, we all kind of tend to do this where, like when you're so hyper focused on your team and then you kind of get a glimpse at the team you're about to play. It's possible. Like, and I think that's how every Cowboys fan felt on Monday night. Now, it doesn't help that it was really just so one-sided in San Francisco's favor, but San Francisco is kind of the template for Dallas, right? A limited quarterback, an all-world defense. If you can generate some turnovers, that's where Dallas really kind of hasn't had the success that they had early on last season. They did have the 2 interceptions on Carson Wentz a week ago, but we haven't seen, this sort of strip sack fumble that sets them up on the 23-yard line or anything like that. It does kind of feel like, at least with the state of the Rams offensive line, with Stafford being so questionable, with him being so out of options and his one option going up against one of the top corners in the NFL, it seems like the dominoes are there for this to fall in favor of Dallas. Do you think this would be, Dallas has beaten the Bengals and everybody, made a big deal about that, obviously Super Bowl loser, and then, beat 2 kind of clunky divisional teams. Do you think if they were to win this game, that it is a sort of bigger mount for them to hang up. You know what I mean? Like, do you feel like the Rams are still kind of carrying that aura that if, people would say, okay, like you beat the Giants and the Commanders, but you went to LA, you've now not only beaten the team who lost the Super Bowl, but you beat the team who beat them with Cooper Rush. Do you think the Rams still kind of have that juice, or is it starting to dissipate too much?
I mean, I think that one way to put the context of the 49ers game, or to put that game in context, is we have some evidence that the 49ers have the best defense in the NFL.
How dare you, Kenny?
So I think that under that context, because the 49ers do, by most measures, have the best defense right now, they do have a reputation going into the year of like, yeah, these are great players. Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Hufanga now. It's like going down the line. It's like, okay, pretty good defense and one that dominates the Rams. So to take them out of that and say, okay, well, the Rams were 2-1 prior to then, and their only loss was to the Bills, a team that
they almost blew it to the Falcons, right? Like, I feel like they
for sure. I mean, like, I definitely think that those other two games are not perfect either. And so it's like, okay, not necessarily the Super Bowl team. Is also a team that the Rams last year had a 3-game losing streak in the middle of the season. All of them were by more than 12 points or something. Stafford was throwing interceptions like crazy, and then they won 8 or 9 of the last 10 games to win the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. So it's like there's that side of it. Then there's another side of it, which is like all those changes I talked about on the offensive line, all those changes I talked about at wide receiver, all these kind of draft classes under Les Snead and company recently that aren't producing enough starters and key role players. Last year's draft, the 2021 draft, the Rams came out with like 9 or 10 players out of it. And out of that entire group, I think Ernest Jones, the inside linebacker, is the only viable starter. And that's just so far, but it's not looking good for Tutu Atwell. It's not looking good for, some guys who've already been let go, like Jacob Harris and, Robert Rochelle was a 4th-round pick who we thought, oh, he's looking like more and more of an heir apparent at cornerback. He's like 5th on the depth chart, and the Rams need cornerbacks. So it's kind of that situation where it's like the Rams' plan, as everybody knows, trade first-round picks for expensive veterans who can help lift up other players, but you're going to need value in those rookie contracts. Mm-hmm. And the Rams aren't getting enough value out of those rookie contracts. They're also, to be fair, not getting enough value out of the expensive contracts. Allen Robinson, it's like,
right.
So there are those parts of it where there's so many changes. Von Miller is gone. Odell Beckham Jr. is gone. They don't have any replacements outside of Aaron Donald. There's no pass rush. And right now, I mean, I don't think Aaron Donald would be, one of the defensive player of the year candidates. Not that he has to be at all times. He's incredible. He's still the best defensive tackle in the NFL. But Leonard Floyd, he's making something like $20 million. I still don't understand what the motivation was for that contract either time, because they signed him to a 1-year deal. Then they signed him to a much more expensive 3-year deal. And he's got 0 sacks and 3 pressures in 4 games. And that's like, well, he's got more of a game. He's kind of like a run defender. He's kind of like this, that, and the other thing. It's like, that's fine if you also have Von Miller, but there is nobody like Von Miller. There's nobody like, there's no other pass rush basically coming from anybody other than Aaron Donald. And there's not really great coverage coming out in the middle of the field, which is where the 49ers could attack it over and over and over again. There's not really, great secondary players. The safety group is kind of awful, which is, Eric Weddle came in at the end of last year and in the playoffs is probably the Rams' best safety. Jordan Fuller, another draft pick who from 2020 looked like he was going to be this huge steal on day 3. He was like play calling duties in his second year. He's been demoted to basically just a bench player. Taylor Rapp has constantly drawn the ire of Rams fans, and he had one of his visibly worst games last week because of Deebo Samuel. And it's just kind of like, okay, questions at safety, questions at cornerback, questions at linebacker, questions at edge rusher. I think defensively, the Rams have to this has to be a statement game for the Rams, just as much as it has to be a statement game for the Cowboys. The Cowboys may want to hang a Super Bowl champion on their hat,
right?
But the Rams need to hang anybody on their hat right now. So, big game for, I think, Matthew Stafford just as much as it is for Cooper Rush.
I think all that's really well said. Obviously, I think people only look at the Rams formula because they've had like moments of success from the later day draft picks or kind of day 3 draft picks. Obviously, not coming together right now, and that increases the need for your like the top heaviness part of your roster to be even greater. You said like Aaron Donald's not playing like defensive player of the year right now. Well, when nobody else is playing even adequately, you increase the need for him to play at that ridiculous level every single week. Jalen Ramsey, you talked about Deebo Samuel kind of making Taylor Rapp look back. I mean, there were 1,000 Cowboys fans tweeting on the big Deebo touchdown. Man, if Trayvon Diggs avoided a tackle the way that Jalen Ramsey did, he'd be getting lit up. And that's just kind of the way that, this whole thing goes. That's the negative side. The positive, like I remember when Taylor Rapp was coming out of the draft, every Cowboys fan wanted him. I mean, I remember every fan of the NFL wanted Andy Isabella, and this week he goes unclaimed on waivers. Like that's just kind of life and the way it all unfolds. I'm very, very interested in this game. I'm writing about this week as well. This is a big game for Mike McCarthy. I feel like he's not getting a lot of love. I mean, all credit for the winning streak goes to Dan Quinn or Micah Parsons, and there's enough to go around, but I don't know how Mike gets none of it. If he outduels Sean McVay, obviously somebody who a lot of people think very highly of, I think it would go a long way towards the hat on his head, so to speak. What's your final feel, your final vibe? I mean, because it seems pretty negative. It seems like you're down on the Rams. You don't have to pick the game or pick the score or anything like that, but generally speaking, how do you see this thing going?
I mean, I don't know if I know how I feel about the Rams. Really, it's like it's very disjointed. These two concepts of I know that Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp are great players. I think that Matthew Stafford is a great player, and I do think that that comes with some errors, mistakes that get blown up. But at the end of the day, he had 41 touchdown passes last season, 17 interceptions. He led the NFL in interceptions, but he had 17, and Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady all had 15 or whatever. It's like such a minor difference.
You can say that in a few different ways, right?
Yeah, and as long as he's got 41 touchdown passes, then it's fine. This year he's got 4 touchdown passes, and so whether that's on the offensive line, whether that's on I don't even want to say whether that's on Allen Robinson. Allen Robinson did exactly what I would do. Even if I knew I couldn't play football, I would sign that contract. It's like this has to be on the Rams, and whether that's because they overrated Allen Robinson, whether that's because they're still trying to work on developing how to get Allen Robinson involved in the game plan. No matter what it is, it's a situation that cannot be accepted if it continues to be like he gets 2 targets for 10 yards. It just doesn't make any sense. So there's those moments of just being like, I don't really understand everything that's going on in the plan here, and it's just going to make those questions. Like when other people complain about the Rams drafting Tutu Atwell in the 2nd round, instead of Creed Humphrey, for a long time, I'm just like, hey, don't even really worry about it. Let's see what Tutu Atwell can do. Okay, well now we're almost, we're a quarter of the way into his 2nd year, and I'm just kind of like, I'm running out of defenses for Tutu Atwell just because he's not playing. He was a healthy scratch last week, and the Rams, as we keep saying, need wide receivers. So I just think that maybe Les Snead and company's plan isn't working. So it did work towards a Super Bowl, and I think that's enough for Les Snead to get another 5 years. It's right. Like, okay, it worked once. But we're only talking about week 5 against the Cowboys. So I think that it has to be a concern for the Rams going into this one. Like, this is a Cowboys team that has won their last 3 games. And even if we're facing Cooper Rush, they're getting the job done, and he's playing well enough. Let me ask you so that I know, like, how good is Cooper Rush?
You're really kicking the hornet's nest of Cowboys Twitter right now, because I think you can understand there's a sector, I don't know what percentage they are, what percentage they comprise of Cowboys fans who say keep Cooper Rush, he's winning, whatever, blah blah blah. I mean, his offensive contributions are minimal, not to minimize them, but I mean, from an EPA per play standpoint, I mean, they're lower than Dak's in his lowest stretch last year. Not, massively, but they still are. I mean, so my point is, like, even Dak in like the worst shape we've ever seen him, is still a preferable option. But it's difficult to kind of like get people to see, right? People see the wins and they think what's happening. But, I mean, this is a Cowboys defense that I think it's silly to rely on points, right? Like, we have so many more advanced ways of looking at things, but a Cowboys defense that hasn't surrendered more than 20 points in a game this season, a Cowboys defense that, while they're not taking the ball away at the rate that they did to this point last year, they're finding other ways to contribute: third down stops, fourth down stops, lots of sacks, lots of tackles for loss. This too high safety situation is just kind of taking over the NFL, to where, like, basically every offense is trash. I mean, and the Cowboys are kind of, partly responsible for that. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Cooper's really benefiting from that. Cooper has, I would say the best defense in the NFL, but at worst, the second best behind San Francisco. He's got a kicker who's 10 of 11 on field goal attempts. He's got a punter who had one weird shank a week ago, but other than that, has been solid at his job. And he's got a head coach who's aggressive, who's not afraid of kind of going for it in different ways and different facets, which includes letting Cooper Rush, throw deep or kind of climb the pocket when he has to. So I think he's in a really advantageous situation overall. I think if the game is put on him, right, like if Cooper Rush has got to throw the Cowboys to victory, I don't think that that's possible. The run game wasn't there for Dallas last week against Washington's stout front. I imagine Aaron Donald will help mitigate it as well. But yeah, I mean, they're limited with Cooper Rush, but I feel like these teams are in different places. I feel like the Rams are trying to rely on like these like five people, to speak arbitrarily, to carry the team, whereas Dallas is down right now. Dallas is down their superstar, certainly in Dak, and their roster is just, the floor is so much higher. And I think we're like the up and beyond that, the Micah Parsons is, the Trayvon Diggs is, the CD Lambs as of late are starting to rise and carry the team, and which makes them really exciting for when Dak does return. But Cooper in a vacuum, I think is maybe like the 40th best quarterback in the NFL.
Well, that's helpful. Definitely to know, I think that it's like, for me, ultimately makes sense for it to be a close game, probably a relatively low scoring game.
Yeah, take the under.
Yeah, take the under, DraftKings, and, probably thinking that this game is basically decided on mistakes and who takes advantage of those mistakes the most, so it could be a special teams play. It could be an interception. It could be a fumble.
I think it's a Sean McVay punt on 4th and 2. Like, I think that's it. I think we're looking back at a moment where coward McVay shows up. To his credit, can be aggressive as well, but can also be quite cowardly. And I think we look back and say, how did you not go for it? You knew X, Y, and Z. I think that is maybe the like pivot point. That when we're kind of doing the postmortem on this game.
Yeah, and I think you make a great point about just like that matchup with Diggs and Kupp really could isolate the Rams' options. And if that's the case, well, this is a great opportunity for anybody else besides Cooper Kupp to show up.
Yeah, so, Allen Robinson, this is your time, man. I mean, like, just
I don't really think that. I mean, I'm the most patient guy, I think. Like I said, I've been with Tutu Atwell this whole time. So I'm the most patient guy. But I really think that it's fair to ask if Allen Robinson is toast. It's like, it really feels like we're going to get to that point where he was bad last year. He was getting a lot of credit for just playing on the Bears. And people going like, well, it's because he's on the Bears. And it's like, man, has anybody made more money off of one 1,400-yard season 7 years ago or whatever?
The quarterback, which authored it, just retired, by the way. Former Ram, Blake Bortles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. He did. And his last game, he had -7 passing yards for the Rams. So I think it's we don't want to see it get into a situation like Kenny Golladay in New York.
I was about to say, I mean, but unlike Allen, Kenny was at least coming off of an impressive season, like, in the moment, you know what I mean, that New York signed him, which isn't, you're right. Like, people are chasing this like legendary like moment. He's what people think Odell is, right? Like, people for a long time thought Odell was just this one catch. It's like, no, this dude's an elite receiver. Or Clowney's the one hit at South Carolina. Like, that 1 year from Allen Robinson might be that. I mean, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It's just again, it just doesn't seem like at all times the front office and the coaching staff are even talking. And that's kind of, that could be an issue, because it's just like you just go around going, well, was Bobby Wagner the fill-in for Von Miller? Was Allen Robinson the response to Odell Beckham Jr.? Like, they don't seem to always be able to even like assess how these players will be used, so it's kind of confusing. And at the end of the day, I think going up against a team like the Cowboys, I think going into the year, I feel like you would agree the Cowboys, I don't know like how you feel going into the year, but I thought going into the year, I was like, the Cowboys, they're the ones that are like, for a team that had just won the division, they're the team that has to go like, oh man, we have so many questions now because the Amari Cooper is gone and there's like changes going on that it's like, do we have answers for this? But it seems like the sort of situations are reversed.
Well, I mean, even if Allen Robinson and Bobby Wagner are the answers to Odell and Von Miller, like I think Cowboys fans, myself included, in the offseason would have said, well, at least they answered it, right? Like the answers might not work out, but like they answered it. The Cowboys did nothing, and it's still kind of working out, right? Like, we talked a little bit on our roundtable show this past week about how much of what the Cowboys have done would you attribute to luck, and the consensus was kind of 60 to 70%. And yeah, like nobody rationally thought that Noah Brown would help them survive at receiver until Michael Gallup got back or CeeDee Lamb emerged. Nobody rationally thought that Dorrance Armstrong would actually be this legitimate pass rushing option opposite of DeMarcus Lawrence. It certainly helps to play in the same defense as Micah Parsons and Tank himself. So yeah, I mean, the Cowboys just kind of, the analogy I came up with was they jumped out of a plane with no parachute through a ring of fire with rattlesnakes tied around their ankles, and they landed, and they're like, that was a great idea. Like, whoa, no, this like the process, is not justified by the results. Which is a line of thought I know you appreciate as well. But I'm very this does kind of feel like two ships passing in the night in that very particular sense. So I'm very interested to watch them on Sunday afternoon. The line has moved several times. I know that it opened as LA favored by 6.5. On Tuesday, that was down to 4.5. And then I checked it on Wednesday before we started recording. It was back up to 5.5. So lots of movement one way or the other. My last question for you, Kenny. Last week, to preview the Cowboys Commanders game, I had on Dalton Ross, who covers Survivor among many other things for Entertainment Weekly. And I asked Dalton to compare Micah Parsons to the best Survivor comp he could come up with for Micah. So I will tell you after, but I would like you, since we started the conversation with Survivor, to tell me what all-time Survivor player Micah Parsons reminds you most of and why.
Oh my goodness. Let me think. I'm very bad with memory, but I am obviously very good with Survivor. Micah Parsons is interesting. To me, the first thing I think of is just like that element of everybody knows this guy in the draft might be the best player in the draft, and yet he's not going in the top 10, That's like that thing where it's like people were coming up with any excuse they could to say that Micah Parsons was a bad draft pick. He was like, oh, he took the year off. Oh,
he had character concerns, right? Yeah, like all this stuff for sure.
Yeah, and then I guess the character concerns and all these kinds of things, it's like all just sort of draft talk that gets overblown, and you're still stunned there. And at the end of the day, immediately it was like Micah Parsons was the best player in the draft. If not, at least the best defensive player. And so it's like, to me, I think about, character concerns being overblown. I think about somebody who kind of like comes out of nowhere to be the best. I don't know if this is a good one. I'm going to go with it. I'll go with poverty.
Wow.
Like one of the all-time great players. And definitely people said, she has character concerns, maybe like she's just very smart about the way that she goes about advancing in the game and using everything that she has to her advantage. It's like, I don't think she's like other players in Survivor, tries other, women on Survivor have come in the past to be like, I want to be the next poverty. I want to be the next poverty.
Right.
And you can't. And it's like there is no other linebacker like Micah Parsons in the league, and there won't be one coming through the pipeline, even though that's going to be the narrative in the upcoming drafts. Oh, this guy could be the next Micah. This could like, and I think like there just won't be another one. So I'm going to go with poverty.
Wow. Not at all the direction that because I answered the question in my own mind when I thought of it. And I thought of Tyson because I thought of like comp beast, and sort of like, not that Micah's like talking trash, but like confident, you know what I mean? Like he's very confident in his skill set. Tyson certainly not lacking in the confidence area. Dalton went in a similar direction to me. He went with Ozzy, like just a total monster, obviously. Parvati is a very, I think people like mistake her for being politically savvy. I don't think she's politically savvy. She's just politically ruthless. And that's better than being politically savvy. And that's kind of how Micah is. Like that is a very, very solid comp in a very different way. You could have done something very strange. You could have done like Ethan or something like that. Wouldn't have worked out in any way, shape, or form.
I had to talk it out because I'm just like and I'm like, okay, well, what's Micah to me? And what does that remind me of? There's probably only there's been dozens or hundreds or whatever of survivors, and probably just about 25 or so that are somewhere there in the brain. And that's one that definitely, one of my favorite players. I'm one of my several of my favorite seasons. And she always shows up, she's always showing up. And so like, if she's in the game, you got to that's an elite player. So definitely something there.
I think that makes Eric Weddle, who you mentioned, the Suri, because he got off the couch, you know what I mean, to come like help the Rams in the Super Bowl.
Totally.
Kenneth Arthur, turfshowtimes.com, and really just anywhere in the world. Like, I mean, if you send good vibes out into the universe, they will land in and around Kenny. Kenny, thank you so much for joining us. Your final words before we say goodbye.
Go Cody. Go Survivor.
Well said. Thanks, Kenny.